Dalton, and this is Bri Slemons, and today we will be discussing the topic of whether genetically modified foods are or are not safe for human consumption.
A little bit of background on genetically modified foods, according to WOC, is that GMOs are foods that have had their DNA changed using other plants and animals and the genes from those plants or animals. So basically what this statement is saying is that GMOs, or genetically modified organisms, is a cut and paste operation. According to Domingo and Bordonata, some examples of genetically modified foods are potatoes, cucumbers, peas, tomatoes, corn, rice, and soybeans.
So today I will be talking about the side that believes genetically modified foods are safe for human consumption. According to WOC and the World Health Organization, some benefits of genetically modified foods includes it improves the shelf life, protects crops from harsh conditions such as harsh cold or harsh warm conditions, and a lesser use of pesticides. 3 studies I will talk about today are done in rats, mice, and bunnies. So in rats, it's talking about milk, and in the mice is talking about the papaya, and in the rabbits it's talking about flaxseed. So the first study I'll talk about is the milk in the mice study done by Chen and Associates. In this study there were 2 groups of mice, and one was fed genetically modified milk and one was fed a regular milk. And in this study they tested the gastrointestinal health of the mice after they ingested the milk. So after this milk was ingested, there was no effects on the gastrointestinal health of the mice that ingested the genetically modified milk. So overall this showed no adverse effects on their health. In the next study is much like the mice study, where there's 2 groups of rats, and in the first group of rats there was genetically modified papaya, and in the second group of rats there was just plain papaya. And so in this study it shows that in this study done by Lin and Associates, they tested the immunotoxicity. So overall immunotoxicity means adverse effects on the immune system. And in this study the rats had no adverse effects on their immune system after they ingested the genetically modified papaya. In the third study I'll talk about that really hones in on my point is done in rabbits and flaxseed. So in this study, there were 2 groups of rabbits, much like the other studies that I found. And in this study, the one group of rabbits was fed like a normal rabbit diet, and the other group of rabbits were fed that same diet, but they added genetically modified flaxseed. And in this study, they actually found that the genetically modified flaxseed had health benefits. So like a decrease in heart disease or cardiovascular diseases in these rabbits. So actually, there were no adverse effects, there were actually health benefits of the genetically modified food. So overall, these are all the reasons why I believe genetically modified foods are safe for human consumption. These studies showed that there were no adverse effects on the immune system or the gastrointestinal health, and the third study actually showed that flaxseed had health benefits on these animals. So these are the reasons why I believe they are safe for consumption.
I will be discussing why genetically modified foods are not safe for human consumption. And 3 things that I will be talking about is the primary concern, the immune responses, and what genes are changed and how they're lost in genetically modified foods compared to the original genes of the foods. So imagine that you or a family member has an allergic reaction or an allergic sensitivity that you're not aware of. With genetically modified foods, this is actually something that is very common. If you ingest a food that is genetically modified, it is genetically modified with something that you may be allergic to. And it can severely and potentially damage someone and almost lead to death. The first point I will be talking about is the primary concern for genetically modified organisms. According to the University of Utah, a primary concern is preventing genetically modified versions from mixing with naturally existing populations of plants from which they're derived. So if 2 sources of plants or animals that ingest these plants mix, then the natural and unnatural toxins in that food can be made and later made in the human body as well. Another thing that I will be discussing is the immune responses that can happen if you ingest a genetically modified food. According to a study done by Prescott and Hogan, The usage of genetically modified foods for human consumption has increased a number of fundamental questions, including the ability of foods to elicit potential harmful immune responses, including allergic hypersensitivities. So if people are not aware of what is being put into foods, which is what is happening with genetically modified foods, as I stated earlier, they may be allergic to something that is being put into that food. And if that substance is absorbed into their intestinal tract, this can lead to a severe allergic reaction and even death in the future if it is consumed in large amounts. So an example of an allergic reaction, according to a study done by Smith & Smith, is from a GMO crossbred between a tomato and a soybean. So if someone is allergic to any soy product or soybean product and they're consuming the tomato that is crossbred with the soybean, they can have severe damage and could potentially lead to death, depending on how much of the product they are consuming or how much of the soybean is crossbred with the tomato. Lastly, I will be talking about what happens with genes when they are genetically modified. Again, according to the University of Utah, when farmers stop growing old varieties of crops, they start growing only genetically modified foods. This decreases the diversity of the old genes, which have distinct characteristics of each plant and crop that we see around us today. When they lose the old variety, you lose the old genes of that crop, which in turn can change the structure and function of that plant. In conclusion, I believe that genetically modified foods are not good for human consumption because studies show toxins are created when natural and fake products mix. Immune responses can be deadly if people do not know what they are consuming, and farmers decrease the diversity of genes of each crop that they grow when they stop growing the original crops and only grow genetically modified crops. So this will decrease the structure and function of that crop and the diversity of the original genes as well.